Can you tell us your name?
Sure, I'm Susan Baird.
And when were you a student at Vanderbilt?
1976 to 1981.
Okay. So right around the time that the Women's Center opened and began. And we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Sure.
Where are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in 1958 in Tupelo, Mississippi. I spent my entire childhood in Mississippi, and I went to public schools during the Civil Rights era.
So what made you choose to come to school at Vanderbilt?
Well, my family had been in Tennessee for over 300 years, and I guess it was a rebellion act because both my parents went to UT Knoxville.
Okay.
I also tell people that Vanderbilt was my fallback school. I had applied to Annapolis. I was trying to be in the first class of women at Annapolis.
Oh,
and
really?
luckily, my vision and the braces on my teeth kept me out of Annapolis, and now I'm here.
Okay.
Now,
So did you have to have 20/20 vision to...
they wanted their first class that had women to have 20/20 vision.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm glad that you came to Vanderbilt.
Oh, gosh, yes, of course.
So, let's see. I'm trying to think if I had a follow-up question for that.
So
I guess, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I came to Vanderbilt as a biomedical engineering major, and I was in the engineering school for about 3 semesters until I decided that the math was a little more than what I wanted to take on, and I made the jump to A&S in geology, and I got a BS in geology.
Okay. So what was your experience in those science classes? Did you find that you were one of the only...
Oh, no.
Really? Okay.
No, my, so they had a couple of meetings of the freshman class of engineering, because there were 300 of us.
Okay.
And a full 100 of us were women.
Really?
And a lot of women that I would meet in my chemistry and my math classes that were, say, A&S going pre-med, they, all of the women that were in engineering were also there too. So I don't recall a class that I didn't have at least 50% women in until I was probably a junior.
And was that because you were in an upper division
Upper
class?
division of geology, yeah. But I found that I think the people in my year in geology, I think it was 50% women.
That's so surprising. Did you have women who were faculty members in geology at that time?
There was, Dr. Miller was there, Molly Miller, but I
Yes.
didn't have a class with Molly Miller.
Okay.
So all the professors in geology were male.
Okay. Interesting. Sort of more of a general question about Vanderbilt at that time. Were most of the students from the South in the late 1970s, early 80s?
No, I think probably, well, maybe right at 50%.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of my friends weren't from the South.
Okay. And I'm trying to think. I guess I have to consult my history. But
Sure.
you know there were quotas for admission for women.
Really, up through the 70s?
Yeah, they
Okay.
started relaxing that so that it ended
Okay.
up being more 50-50. So did you notice that there were more men than women, just sort of generally speaking, on the campus?
Well, my situation was a little different. At that time, they put freshmen in 2 areas, either in the quad that Lupton is in, or in the Kassam quad. And there were 6 buildings in the Kassam quad, and one of them was women only. And then
Okay.
there were 5 guys dorms, and I was in that dorm. So, I had all these guys that I did laundry with that were walking the same directions that I was walking to go to class. So, it was kind of hard, a little hard to say in that regard. I just didn't notice there being that big a difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So were there any restrictions for women students at that time in terms of residence halls or curfews or things like that?
I remember that both one of the floors in MIMS and the 7th floor of Lupton had more restrictions about, say, opposite sex access, or maybe you had to check in with your reeve at the front desk to get in.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think I was on the most restrictive floor at MIMS, and I think everything after that first week's lecture just kind of went by the wayside. And then a few years later, I guess when I was a junior, there were 3 buildings in the Kassam Quad that were women only, and I was like a 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. reeve in one of those. And
What's a reeve?
oh, that would be a student who worked for the housing department as something of more of a monitor than a security person.
Did you sit at the front desk?
I
or
sat
something?
at the front desk, and people would flash IDs at me as they went up to their dorms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Up to the rooms.
Interesting. Yeah, because I've read about more in the 60s and into the early 70s, there were real restrictions on women in terms of coming and going and the hours that they could stay out and things like that. And I expect that they were probably changing by the time you were here.
Yeah, because I started in the fall of '76, so I remember hearing about things over on the other side of campus, because the other freshman women's dorm was so much closer to the fraternity and sorority houses. And they also had an eating
And that's the
area.
one in Branscombe?
Yeah, the Branscombe one, yeah. But I don't recall anything. I think they pretty much let us run free, which was delightful.
So after that, did you stay in Kassam, or where else did you live on campus?
Well, after, that was just a freshman area. And then I was going to be in Vanderbilt Hall.
Okay.
I got mono that summer, and somehow, because there was no air conditioning, there was no air conditioning in MIMS, there was no air conditioning in Vanderbilt Hall, I got some sort of doctor's waiver to get into the towers. So I
Okay.
ended up in a suite in Tower 1 with people I didn't know because one of their friends had flunked out.
Oh.
So I spent my sophomore year and my junior year and my senior year in Tower 1. And then because I had flipped my major and I needed to catch some courses that were only offered in the spring, I spent my 5th year off campus.
Okay. Can I backtrack for
Sure.
a second? No air conditioning?
No air conditioning. The towers were air conditioned.
So how did people survive without air conditioning?
You know, it was kind of unpleasant. I mean, as a kid in Mississippi, I always lived in an air-conditioned home, but none of my schools were air-conditioned. So this was so much further north than I had ever been. And maybe, it was a few weeks in September that were unpleasant, and a few weeks in May or late April. It wasn't really bad.
such a big deal.
And nearly all the classrooms were air conditioned.
This is when you said over on the other side of campus, my mind went to Peabody. And I was wondering if you had any connections with Peabody, because this would have been around the time that Peabody would have been.
The acquisition.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had some friends that, although they were Vanderbilt students, they were resident advisors in Peabody.
Okay.
So I knew a little bit about the campus. On a whim, I took a course in meteorology at Peabody, but the biggest connection I had with Peabody was with the athletes, because when I was an upperclassman in geology, I would tutor baseball and football players in geology because they needed a science course of some sort, and I got some good money off the athletic department tutoring.
So were the athletes often majors over at Peabody?
Yes,
Because they were doing an education
Exactly.
degree? Okay.
exactly.
But not all of the athletes. I
Oh,
mean,
no.
could
I had
choose.
athletes
Okay.
in my classes.
Got it. So did you enjoy being a student at Vanderbilt?
I did. I kept up with a few of my Vanderbilt friends through, my 20s and 30s, and I think all of us agreed that Vanderbilt was harder than any other academic institution we went to. I had a friend that went to WashU Medical School, another one at Harvard Medical School, and they agreed with me that graduate school in other places was easy after your Vanderbilt preparation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did they have any sort of class to kind of ease that transition for you, or was it just kind of a shock to your system throughout your 4 or 5 years here? Because I know I'm just sort of thinking about how they have first year seminars now and Vanderbilt Visions for helping to ease the transition.
Well, it's funny. I hadn't thought about this in years, but this morning we were driving through Belmead, and we came to the intersection at Deer Park, where Chancellor Hurd had his home, and at the start of every school year, they would take all the freshmen out for a picnic on the grounds of his home, and you would go out with your view scepter. They still have view scepters?
Yes.
All right. So my little view sep group, we never got any of the information, and I asked my RA, I said, everyone else on the hall is a view sep group. What's the deal? And she checked and found out that my view scepters had been a couple the previous year, and they'd gotten into a big spat, and they had both quit us. So she said, oh, come on. And then I met other people in my view sep group that we were just kind of the lost souls. So we weren't really sure what you really got out of a view scepter. I learned it vicariously, kind of followed along and watched the other girls in my hall to figure out,
So you were completely abandoned by the program?
Yeah, and this was the hoot of it all. We were view sep group 13, so we felt really,
unlucky.
like lost.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, there really wasn't that much. You could pick your own schedule. Since I started in engineering, I didn't have any electives my first semester. My second semester, I took a photography class because I realized that I needed to be out of the engineering school.
And have a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
So did you have any favorite classes or favorite professors when you were here?
Oh, wow. Now that I do have to think a little bit about that. That photography class was taught by Don Evans, and he would give us complete darkroom access 24/7, but you had to go up a fire escape and crawl through a window to get to it in old science. We all got very familiar with different ways to, I guess, break into that building to get to our lab equipment.
That's incredible.
In my major in geology, Bill Caesar was a sedimentology professor. I thought he was fantastic. He was, he may still be around. He was an American from Kansas who got his PhD at the University of Cape Town.
Oh.
So he had a little bit of a different orientation, I think, on what he focused, on what subject matter he focused. Yeah.
Interesting. So what were some of your favorite things about life at Vanderbilt?
Well, I love the fact it was a residential campus. And that it was, well, you always have to mention the trees when you're at Vanderbilt.
Right, because it's an arboretum.
Yes, and with the little signs on them. About 20 years ago, I was talking to someone, and she said, I'm not going out with you if you're going out with your Vanderbilt friends. I said, why? And she said, because they always say, well, back when I was at Vanderbilt. And they have to tell everyone they went to Vanderbilt. And I said, yeah, that's just the way it is. I'd really never had fall. Most of my childhood was on the Gulf Coast. I mean, right there on the beach. So and then my friends I met in college who came down from the Northeast would go, wow, this is really a sad excuse for fall. And I'm like, no, this is fantastic.
It's just your perspective.
It is perspective. I mean, I loved being in Nashville. It was the biggest city that I'd ever lived in. I think the thing that made my student years so wonderful is people could participate in a lot of different things, and it was okay. I mean, I played rugby. I ended up sitting on a couple of advisory boards. I had not super involved, but I was in a sorority. And you could just do so many different things, where I know at some schools you have the Greeks, you have the Indies, you have people that always go to sporting events. You have people that never go. I always loved finding the calendar to see what readings and what talks were across the campus, and that I could go to any of them at any time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, be it in the medical school or in the engineering school or something in A&S. And that was amazing to me, that you could just walk in and sit down because you were part of that campus environment.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall any particular events or speakers that were especially noteworthy while you were here, or is it just more the idea that you had the opportunity to do those things?
Well, I recall 2 readings that just were so amazing. John Crow Ransom read in the law school,
Mm-hmm.
and Truman Capote read in the medical school.
Oh, wow.
And I was desperately cramming for a paleontology midterm at the time of Capote's reading. And I went with a friend of mine who was in the law school, and of course he had the most recent New Yorker that had a Truman Capote short story, and Capote was going to autograph that. And I realized that all I had was my paleontology textbook. So, so I tell my family, you know, if you ever have to go through my books when I'm gone, open every single one of them and see
If there's a signature.
if there's a signature in it. Because if it was, you know, most likely if I went to some event at Vanderbilt, it was in a textbook rather than a book of that author's own work.
So did you feel like, you said earlier that it was a really rigorous place, you know, Vanderbilt, in terms of studying?
Oh,
Did you
absolutely.
spend a lot of time studying, or?
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. I had a college prep background in high school, and I had, you know, the standard 4 years of math, and I threw in an extra year of science, so I had 5 years of high school science and an AP chemistry course. And I had 3 years of high school German, and it didn't really prepare me to take those same subjects at Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So were there any least favorite things about Vanderbilt? Any things that you thought were just downsides?
Well, there are things now that when I step back, I say, yeah, if I'd only gotten that through my hard head then, my life would have been so much easier. I think there were some people that always they always felt they had to have a certain Vanderbilt look, and they were somewhat condescending of those who didn't. I mean, my peer group at Vanderbilt probably wore blue jeans every day, maybe hiking boots, an occasional button-down shirt or a flannel shirt. We didn't have we didn't wear our monogram sweaters every day. I mean, some people were really trying to segregate others by their appearance, and it may have been income disparity. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know that at the time I was at Vanderbilt, probably only 35% of the women were in sororities, but that it seemed to be a bigger presence than it was.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like that's sort of where that condescension was coming from? From
the Greek versus
yeah.
No, I think it was just
more of a class.
It was more of a class thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I hated dressing for football games, so I didn't go to that many football games. But because I was tutoring football players, I'd listen to the games on the radio, so I could see if, you know, one of the guys I tutored, you know, had a good hit or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Did they use, they don't use this term that much anymore, but they did about 10 years ago a lot, the Vandy girl, and then
TVC?
And then TVC. Was
Yeah.
that in use at the time?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
What is TVC?
What's a typical Vanderbilt co-ed? She wore either pearls or little gold screw beads. And She had a headband and a sweater. She didn't major in anything typically difficult. She kept her Thursday nights free for keggers at the good houses. Yeah, it was a look. It was a definite look.
Were there any, in doing research for a project last year, I learned about like Miss Charm and a couple of other awards given to women for like being, and I can't think of the name of the one.
I really think that was before
Was
my
that
time.
before your time?
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably fell away.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that the TBC was still in use.
It stays there. I mean, that's not used now, is it?
No.
Oh, well, that's a relief.
So, yeah, but I mean, the Vandy Girl sort of became a type, and that I haven't heard in use in a while. Yeah, but it's interesting that.
Yeah, I'd have to say that even though I was a pretty average student, that I would say the first 10 years I was out of college, if people looked at my resume and saw I went to Vanderbilt, I got an interview. And I knew if I could get the interview, I could probably get the job. And more often than not, I was successful in that.
So it really opened doors.
It really
for
did
you.
open doors.
So, in terms of thinking about some of the negatives you mentioned, maybe there was some, like you said, maybe some attitudes based on appearance, like judging people on appearance. Were there any other sorts of negatives, or was that kind of the main thing that you felt was problematic during your time?
I would say so, but as I found myself in more science classes, that was less of a problem because everybody was keeping crazy, strange hours. Did you ever have to use punch cards with computers? All right. So the first Vanderbilt computer class I had was in basic, and we had these teletype machines with reams of yellow paper. So you'd type on the yellow paper, and then if you got to Fortran, you had punch cards. And I can't tell you how many of us would be carrying these stacks of punch cards and then go down to the computer center and hope that we had typed all those punch cards just right so the most simple program would run. I mean, if you're doing that at all hours of the night, you find your own group. And that was the great thing. You know, you'd find other people who were keeping the same hours you were keeping and going to the same classes. You trusted their prof references over anything you'd read on a survey. And you find your own group.
So you mentioned that you were involved with rugby and then a little bit with a sorority?
Yeah. My sophomore year, I went through Rush, and then you could go in your freshman spring or sophomore fall. And I decided my freshman spring was too crazy. I went in my sophomore Rush, and there were about 9 national sororities on campus and this one little local group. And I liked everyone I met. They were all either in engineering or science. And I thought, oh, this is cool. So I pledged with them, and then they got rushed by national sororities because they'd had a good, steady size, a good, steady history. And there were 5 national sororities that weren't on the Vanderbilt campus that started rushing us. And all their alums in town would come, and I mean, I felt like it was so weird. They'd kind of look at us like, you know, did they really want to be our mothers, right? And so it got down to 2 sororities, and the group of 20 ended up picking AD Pi. So the AD Pi chapter was founded on the campus in '78. And then after we were all initiated, I immediately went on academic probation. So, so over the next, 2 years, whether I was on academic probation or whether they were doing something fun, I was pretty much a chapter member. We didn't have a house. We didn't have a house until well after I left.
So did that mean that their activities were more limited, or?
Well, let's see then. Only the officers could live in the house. Is that still the same?
Yes.
All right, so we would meet in a coffee shop in the basement of the towers called the Good Woman. So we would have our chapter meetings in the basement of the towers. And we usually got paired with the AE Pies or the ZBTs, which were guys who had similar academic credentials to to ours. So if we ever got together with any type of competition with any of the other Greeks, usually we could take it.
Mm-hmm.
Not me, because I was on academic probation, but but my sisters.
So what was the Good Woman coffee shop?
It was
Do you
just
know the why it was called that? Or
I don't. I think it was probably from a song title before I got there, and it was mainly truly just a place where you could buy coffee and tea. You couldn't buy alcohol in the towers. You could buy alcohol in the Overcup Oak on top of Surratt. But
Mhm.
and in those days, if you were 18, you could buy any type of alcohol. So they tried to limit where on campus that was sold.
So the drinking age then was 18?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Difference
Yeah.
to today.
Yeah.
So what do you think were the most pressing issues for women at Vanderbilt when you were a student?
Even though women had been at Vanderbilt for years, I think it was a question. It was still a question in some male professors' minds of, were we serious students? I had one or two classes where the male professors always called on all the guys who raised their hands first. I had some that said, we will all conduct ourselves as proper Southern women and gentlewomen and gentlemen. I expect a certain dress code in my class, which we found that horrific. I don't think any professor would dare say you're being here kept a young man out, but there was something of a vibe of, why are you doing this? What are your long-term plans? And that was something that you felt like you had to win. You had to win your spot each and every time. It was just kind of a overriding mental thing, I thought.
Wow. So it was like it sounds like it was more in the classroom then than that you noticed.
It was more in the classroom, yeah. And I think it was tougher for my friends that were outside of the sciences, because those that were in English and history and sociology, their male peers were bucking for those law school spots, And I think it was probably, I just think it was harder for them.
That's interesting. The first-year students this year and last year read Strong Inside, which is the story of Perry Wallace. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it.
I haven't read it. I know who Perry Wallace was.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I've talked with some of my colleagues, especially at the Black Cultural Center, about is that many of the black students who first came to Vanderbilt would take the sciences as their major, but maybe for different reasons, because there was a right answer in the sciences,
Okay.
so that they wouldn't have to deal with sort of the issue of subjectivity, that they might be graded down, maybe for racial reasons, but I thought that was really interesting when I read Strong Inside. I noticed that too, and I wondered.
Yeah, let me think about that. I can think of when I was at Vanderbilt, there weren't that many African American students. And I can think of 3 African American students who I'd like to say were my friends, and one was in the nursing school, and the other 2 were not in the sciences, come to think of it.
Interesting.
Yeah. One fellow was in economics, and one woman was in sociology. but there was an African, and I think this had nothing to do with her being in sociology, but the only African-American professor I had was in sociology.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you remember who it was?
I don't. I'd
yeah.
have to look that up
Yeah,
and get it back to you.
that's interesting. Yeah. So, any other sort of pressing issues that you think were noteworthy for women at the time?
Not really.
That's
I mean,
fine.
you know, you want. I mean, if you knew you were going to complete your degree, you wanted to be taken seriously. But you know, part of it is if you're 19, you think you're an adult, and you know, sometimes I don't even think I'm an adult now. You know, it's that. And then if you've got a professor that's 30 or 40 years your senior, you're always going to look like a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you, this may not be a question you can answer, but do you think the issues have improved, some of the issues for women?
Well, I haven't, you know, I don't know anyone on the campus.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that in walking across the campus yesterday, I was completely blown away by how different the student body looked, and that was refreshing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so much more diverse, for one
Oh,
thing.
Quite.
Mm-hmm. It's
Yeah.
very visible.
Mhm.
So did you see yourself as a feminist
I
at
did.
that time?
I
Like,
did.
would you have embraced that label?
Oh, absolutely.
When did you sort of realize that, or what was it being at Vanderbilt that, or did you come to Vanderbilt kind of with that mindset?
Oh, I think I came to Vanderbilt with that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, you know, those of us that were off way over in the Kassam Quad, I think nearly all of us were feminists over there.
Did you talk about feminism together?
Well,
or?
we, I remember two women off my freshman hall, they'd wanted to be over there because they could have their own room, and they'd always had their own room. You know, you got your space. And then someone informed them that, you know, nice girls room together, and they needed to be over at the Branscombe Quad, or it was going to screw their chances in Rush. So they, you know, found their way over there. We never saw them again, and that was that. But most of us over there weren't that concerned about Rush. It was just kind of a, oh, well, let's try this out type thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that I know I identified as a feminist, but I'm not. We didn't really, you know, we were so, being in the late 70s, we were so after the radicalism of the 60s and early 70s. It was just a real quiet time. I think Carter was president, you know.
Right. I wonder, though, like, too, if it was a quiet time because it was the South. And you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how radical, actually, Vanderbilt.
Well, I think the most radical event I can remember was about South African apartheid.
Mm.
There was a guy in my class from South Africa on the tennis team, and he, you know, that we had lots of anti-apartheid marches that would loop around through the Vanderbilt campus and then go down West End.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that more so than feminism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really remember, I mean, we didn't really have a gay activism type, anything going on then either. There was one woman on campus that wanted to have recognition by the university for like a gay and lesbian meeting place or center, and it just never kicked off. But a lot of students would go and dance in the bars.
Mm-hmm.
Gay, straight, didn't matter. Then some that were kind of, I never knew whether these people were on the fence or whatnot. They'd corner you by the restroom and say, "Don't tell anyone you saw me." Where now I think it's pretty open. It's just a social place to go if you go off campus to a bar like that.
Yeah, although I've heard, I mean, so that leads me to ask about sort of being out on campus.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right that it's easier to be out, though within certain pockets.
Exactly.
It's probably not as easy, like maybe in athletics or maybe in Greek life, those sorts of places.
I think it's really the groups you feel comfortable with. And I think I had 10 or 12 close friends that knew I was a lesbian, but the people in my classes didn't know. My sorority sisters didn't know. People I played rugby with didn't. Yeah, but it wasn't. I don't think it was as oppressive a thing as it was later for me when I was working in the corporate world, because I worked for Big Oil in Houston. I mean, when I was working at Enron, no one would have known because it was Enron.
Right.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about how you became involved at the Women's Center.
Okay. Well, I think Vanderbilt knew that it had a problem in recognizing women in the 70s. And there was a commission pulled together to evaluate the status of women at Vanderbilt. I think they realized that more women were applying to Vanderbilt, and those that applied were prepared and equally competent in the classroom. So there was a study, there was a report, and then nothing happened. And I read of the report I found the report after I came to Vanderbilt. So I think this report was from maybe 74 or 75.
76 it was issued.
Okay, say spring of 76 or so.
But the commission met between 72 and 76.
Okay. So I remember the report being available and talk that there'd be a women's center. And then it didn't happen, and it didn't happen. And then the chancellor said there will be a women's center, or President Fields may have said there'll be a women's center. And a fellow wrote to the a letter to the Hustler saying, why do we need that? Or we could increase our library collection, or this or that. And I wrote a rebuttal letter, and they published it, and I was quite surprised. And the next thing I knew, there was a director picked, and there was going to be some space on West Side Row, and I was asked to be the undergraduate rep on the advisory board. So I thought, well, okay, fine, I'll go. And it was interesting because then I felt like the center really serviced staff more than students, and that was a good thing. It was a very good thing, because I knew that there were a lot of pay grades at Vanderbilt, or I'd learned that there were pay grades at Vanderbilt. There was quite a bit of disparity between a housekeeper and a custodian. And there were a few programs. Every spring there was something called Women's Week, and there would be a concert, and there'd be a series of lectures, mostly lunchtime lectures. I think the last of my Women's Week T-shirts made its way to the Salvation Army a few years ago. And Nancy Ransom was selected as the first director, and she just jumped in with both feet and, battled her way through it for years.
So what was the nature of your involvement as a member of the advisory committee?
I would go to meetings maybe twice a month. And it would be a lunchtime meeting, and there'd be 6 or 8 of us around a table, and they just float ideas. They'd say, do you think this would work in your constituency? And I'm thinking, well, my constituency is pretty small. It's women in the sciences who do this and do that. But I felt like I had a voice at the table, and that was neat.
But you were the only student there?
I was the only undergraduate student.
Okay.
There were 2 graduate students. There was one that was in the law school and one in the business school. But more often than not, their schedules kept them from taking these lunchtime meetings. So I'd be the most junior person in the room every time.
So did you, just as there was resistance from that student, and that you wrote the letter in
Right.
response to, did you feel like there was resistance to the Women's Center when it opened and during the rest of your time at Vanderbilt?
Well, I don't think so because it was so small. You know, that building, the director had 1/4 of a floor as her office space. It's just amazing to see what the Women's Center looks like today and how big it is.
Mm-hmm.
And what I assume are the reach of its programs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think the campus needed a women's center?
I think that the campus was, I don't think, what's the nicest way to say this? I think that Vanderbilt was a little worried about its image at the time. They wanted to be thought of as a national school and not just a selective southern school. And they wanted to see what they might need to do to place themselves or to realign their place in the world, even though they're incredibly strong academics across several graduate schools, many departments, and they knew they were a little bit behind the times. I don't think I could say that anything necessarily changed while I was there, because the Women's Center came into being when I was a junior. But I know that the two chancellors after Chancellor Hurd made it a priority to increase the diversity of the student body. And I believe that, having that diversity makes Vanderbilt a stronger institution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that Vanderbilt still needs a women's center?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you can always roll backwards if you're not moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So what role do you think a women's center can or should play?
Well, that's a tough one because I think of Vanderbilt as being such a vertically integrated company. You have faculty, you have staff, you have students, and you have how the university is perceived in the community. So there are a lot of factions that need, I don't want to say coordinating influence, but I don't know, let me think about this for a minute.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's fine.
I may send you a little email.
That's totally fine.
Yeah, I think part of when you go away to college and you're in a completely new environment, it's nice to have a place where you can check in and you feel like you're not going to be censored or screened. And then maybe some question as a student that you might not want to ask a professor or a resident advisor or maybe even a classmate, to know that you kind of have a safe space where you can ask your question and maybe get directed to what you need or want or how something can be accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
It is part of that safe space idea. I think it's important to have that. A women's center, an LGBT center. If you have a Muslim Students Association or an African American students group, I think it's important. If you have a very diverse population that in your campus, that each group has a place where they can check in. You get a reality check. Is such and such professor just being an absolute jerk, or is it all in my head? And they say no. If he tells you can't, he's not going to call on you if you're wearing jeans and you need to wear a skirt in class. He's being a jerk. Okay, that's back to the 70s, but that doesn't happen at Vanderbilt now, does it? No. Okay, good.
Not that kind of discrimination, no.
Yeah.
Maybe other kinds, different kinds.
Yeah. I
that
mean,
I've heard through the grapevine.
Yeah, I mean, who gets picked to be a TA, or who
Mhm.
gets the better TA shifts, the afternoon shifts versus the night labs, things
Mhm.
like that. Sure,
Yeah.
I'm certain that's still there.
Mhm. So are there other like questions that you think I should be asking?
I don't know. Have you had anything come to mind since that?
No, I
was-
mean, I tried to fill in some more
Yeah.
gaps. But I guess if there's anything else that you think would be helpful to know about what it was like to be a woman student at Vanderbilt in the late 1970s. But I
Hmm.
feel like we've covered a lot.
I think we have covered a lot. Yeah.
One other question.
Sure.
What was the status of McTier when you were here? Was it for international students when you were here, or was
No.
it for women? Because it was open. You know, it was open as the first women's residence hall.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Help me with the names of the buildings. As I go from Surratt, you have Cole behind it,
Mm-hmm.
and then the next one is
Tolman.
and then McTier.
No, that's McGill.
McGill. Okay.
And so the McGill group is quite unique because I think it was
McGill was.
probably the same. But McTier is over by student health, or at least where student health is now. I don't actually know. Zerfos, yeah.
Yeah. You know,
Maybe it was an international hall.
I
by
don't
the
think
time
it was. It wasn't an international hall. I think it was one of those dorms that could come up in the lottery, in the housing lottery, just like any other dorm.
Okay, interesting.
But I can't remember knowing
Who lived
anybody
there.
that lived over there, because my friends either were trying to get in the towers or McGill, or they wanted to go way out on the far side, and they wouldn't go to is it Chafin?
Mm-hmm.
Unless they could get together a group of 10 people.
Yeah,
I spent one summer school out there, and I thought, oh no,
that's too far away.
that's too far away. You can hear everything through the wall of the next. Yeah.
So did they still have a dean of women?
No.
Okay, so that had been.
That had been eliminated, probably early 70s, maybe.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact date.
Yeah, no. There were still professors that had housing on campus.
On West Side Row or
What's the street that runs in front of Branscombe?
Vanderbilt Place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there were 2 houses on that street. And my less couth sorority sisters would walk by them and go, if that house would drop, we could have it. And I thought, no, that's really rude. That's more than rude. That's just plain nasty. But, no, I mean, it wasn't an idealized time. It was. I really enjoyed being here, and I was determined to finish that degree, even if it killed me. I couldn't face people saying, "Oh, you went to Vanderbilt and you didn't finish," but I think all of us who got through it, and whether we went to graduate school immediately or did something else, we were always all glad we graduated. And we always carry that. And that's something special. And for years, when I worked for corporations before I got into the nonprofit sector, I'd always fill out the Women's Center on my donation form for the matching grant. So you want me to tell people, you should always just fill in the Women's Center. Don't just send it to... Don't just send it to the college. Be specific where you want that money to go. I don't know, Rory. Anything?
No, I think I've got a lot. Thank you so much.
Sure,
I really
sure. It's been
appreciate it.
fun. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay,
Okay.
wonderful.